And we're live. Hello, everyone. Hello, families of Bates 2024. My name is David Ernst, and I'm the Assistant Director of Digital Marketing at Bates College in the Communications Office. And we're very pleased to welcome President Clayton Spencer and our Dean of Admission and Financial Aid, Leigh Weisenburger. And we're here to have a live Q&A, and I'm going to hand it off to Leigh. So we hope you're joining us, and welcome.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been a couple weeks since I've been with you and really have enjoyed getting to know you through this Facebook group and through other media, but I'm pleased to be back with you now and really thrilled to have President Spencer, or Clayton, as we should all refer to her as, with us here now, given the array of questions and conversations that we've had. Thought it would be wonderful to bring Clayton into the fold. I'll share or reiterate that ordinarily we'd be welcoming you to campus with open arms, and during what are our traditional on-campus admitted student receptions, Clayton would be one of the first people you would meet, and so thought, again, it would be wonderful to have her here. So the way we've structured the next hour or so together is we've collected questions that have come in through the feed over the last 48 hours or so, and have aligned those with other questions that you've been asking over the last few weeks. So we'll start out with a set for Clayton, and then we'll continue on with questions as they come in over Facebook. So again, just want to say thank you all for joining us. Welcome again, and I'll turn it over to Clayton to introduce herself and say a few words of welcome before we get to the first question. So Clayton.
So it's great to be here with you guys. Leigh and Dave didn't tell me I wasn't going to get to see who's out there, but I'll take their word for it. And I'm really looking forward to a conversation. No questions are off limits. And I tend to be an open book, much to the terror of staff who work with me. So I'm really looking forward to the evening. So thanks.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Clayton. And so we'll just get right to it. So question number one, Clayton, and we know that this is certainly top of mind for many families. We'd like to ask you to discuss what Bates has done regarding COVID-19, and if you could share your impressions of the Bates community, how we've navigated that and what has shown through during these challenging times.
Sure. So our odyssey with COVID-19 began, as did everybody else's, in that wake up week in March. And we worked through the week till Friday, March 13th, well chosen, obviously symbolically, where we had to announce that our students needed to leave campus. I mean, that we were like every other residential institution of higher education in the country. What I'm really proud of is that we took about an extra 36 hours before announcing to make sure that we had a fully staffed travel bureau set up to help our most vulnerable students, our high financial needs students, students who might have international visa issues, complicated travel arrangements. And we got our administrative assistants from across the administration, but concentrated in like advancement and fundraising, where they plan travel all the time. And so we literally set up a full service bureau to give our students what they needed. And that was kind of the foot we got off on. And we had so many students tell us then and then write to us, thanking us for being helpful in an incredibly stressful moment. So I feel like that was a great example of the Bates community pulling together. And it has just continued. Our faculty turned on a dime, retooled for a week, and began remote classes. A couple of our assistant professors who are rock stars did amazing trailers for their online classes that have, I don't know if they're on YouTube, but if they are, I commend them to you because they're funny and terrific. We had a scientist, actually a biologist who has a 3D printer, who actually worked with our local hospital to 3D print PPE, the personal protective equipment for healthcare professionals in in our local community. And we also realized that we were sitting on the active ingredient for hand sanitizer, and I forget the name of it. It's something every scientist knows. We had gallons of it. So we made tons of hand sanitizer for the local community. We have two Bates graduates, young Bates graduates, who are in the community, who run the two biggest food pantries in Lewiston, and they are totally coordinating everything. So, amidst a real crisis and super disruption that I know all of you are feeling, your children are feeling them in high schools, you guys are feeling them in your households, the level of disruption, I think people have also risen to the challenge in very generous and graceful ways, which is very Bates. And now we're unpacking all the implications, financial implications, figuring out plans for the fall, etc. So we're doing what everybody else is doing, is trying to deal with a high degree of uncertainty, but stay focused, planful, and united as we work through it.
Great. Thank you, Clayton, and families. I hope that was useful to you. So moving on, and you begin to allude to this, but we've also received, not surprisingly, many questions on this topic as we look ahead and think about the fall. So obviously you don't have a crystal ball, none of us do, but if you could touch upon how the fall might look like at Bates, even if only in the planning stages.
So we all know what we'd like the fall to look like. And I bet I know what you'd like the fall to look like for your children, your students coming to us, I hope. We specialize in a really engaged, personal liberal arts experience where the classroom interactions are intense and individualized, where students are engaged in all manner of other activities, whether arts, drama, sports, etc. So you can only do that if you're on campus. And our fervent hope is that we can be on campus in the fall. We have been very lucky to have a couple of parents in our existing student body, parents of existing students, who are very high octane infectious disease experts. And we have been in touch with them and following the public health information very carefully. And I think it remains very uncertain, but being able to gather again in an intensive residential setting will require a certain kind of progress over the summer and a certain kind of testing, both the underlying COVID testing and antibody testing, so that we can be equipped to do what we need to do with our students. Right now, it doesn't seem like our country is getting it together to do that very well. So that is a question mark. I'm hoping that as we get into June, we'll get a lot more clarity. I do not think we will know where we stand with respect to the fall until June. And there's a possibility we may operate on campus and remote. We may have international students well on progress to their degree that can't get back here because of visa restrictions. We may have students whose families don't feel comfortable sending their students here. So maybe we will be operating in a hybrid model. Our least favorite model, and I'm sure this is true for all of our students as well, would be to be operating in a remote model. And we're thinking, we have two faculty committees now, faculty staff committees, one focused on fall planning that is looking at how might we adapt our calendar, how might we adapt our teaching models to make sure that we retain maximum flexibility in the fall. And then the other committee is looking at financial implications. And I think if you're looking at a variety of liberal arts colleges, because I'm sure your children all have fantastic choices, every college is kind of doing this, figuring out how to open safely in the fall, and then figuring out how to absorb the financial impact of this whole big giant thing that has happened to turn our lives upside down.
Well, thank you, Clayton. You covered a lot of ground there. And I'm sure we might return to some particulars later on, but to pivot a bit, again, reminding folks that this is the time that Clayton would ordinarily welcome you to campus and congratulate your students on being admitted to the class of 2024. Clayton, could you tell these families a bit about how you're feeling about the class of 2024 and what excites you most?
Well, let me just say, I hope you parents are proud of your students, your children. You know, once they get here, we call them adults, but I realize they're your children. So I have children myself, so I still think of them as children, even though they're getting a little long in the tooth now. But this class is amazing. 3 years ago, we had a 45% increase in admissions, and we have sustained and gone beyond that level the last 2 years. This is the second highest raw number of applications we've ever had, and we are about to wind up with the most geographically diverse class we've ever had, the most racially and ethnically diverse class we've ever had, a really strong representation of first-generation students, and one of the things you get when there's high competition for the seats in a place is fantastic academic, creative, and all manner of other kinds of talents, interests, and intellectual curiosity. So I am super excited about this class. And my biggest pleasure actually is when all these statistics that I get from Leigh every day, looking at sort of who's applied and where they're from and how many from, I always ask how many from North Carolina because that's where I'm from. And Leigh's been pushing that number up steadily over the years. But it's really fun when the statistics turn into live human beings, and those live human beings have parents whom I love meeting. So I am looking forward to that moment with your children as well, hopefully very soon in the fall.
Excellent. Thanks, Clayton. And so I know you said this about yourself, Clayton, earlier, that you're an open book. And it is one thing that we all really adore and appreciate about you. And also, I think that coupled with the fact of how wonderfully smart and brilliant you are, but yet incredibly down to earth and fun and funny. So as families would like to get to know you a bit more, can you share about details about your background? It's not entirely been the most traditional path to a college presidency. So whatever you're willing to share about your path to Bates and your path to this role.
I would say my path in life has been a bit of a zig and a bit of a zag, but there's some through themes. So I grew up on a college campus, actually Davidson College in North Carolina, from an academic family. I went to a liberal arts college myself, and then I always thought the only career decision you had to make was what field do you choose, what academic field, because that's the only model I had ever had. And I was like deep in the archives of Harvard Graduate School doing arcane research into Paul Tillich's theology when I decided I really need a lot more action than this. So I went to law school and began first a career as a litigator. Then I ended up running higher education policy for the United States Senate, working for Senator Kennedy, who was chair of the relevant committee. And then I worked at Harvard for 15 years. So from that, you get my interest in what you'll hear more about in a few minutes, purposeful work, which is our approach to working with students to take the values of the liberal arts and turn them into how they think about moving through the world and making big career and personal choices. So I'm interested in that because my career was such a zig and a zag. But the other benefit of my rather sort of wandering path is that I run a little cottage industry at Bates of students who come to me and they'll be like, I really want to go to law school. Can you talk to me about law school? And I'm like, well, it's been 40 years since I've been there. There've been a few changes. And I do that, but I love actually working directly with students and am deeply engaged in building the Purposeful Work program. So we can talk more about that in a few minutes if people are interested.
Thanks, Clayton, for sharing that about yourself. So again, recognizing families here tonight, the stage in which your students are in their college search process. Clayton, what do you think students should consider when making their final college choice?
So here's what I think. I think this looms as a big choice for students and families. It's a huge investment, and I think everybody feels like there's a lot riding on it. And the first thing I would say is you can't go wrong. If your students are talented enough to be admitted to Bates, they have fantastic choices, and I just want to congratulate all of them and all of you. And what I would say to each student, if they were in front of me rather than the parents, none of whom I can see, so maybe the students are there too, I think the way you think about your college choice is of a piece with the way you think about a liberal arts education, which is you figure out how to take in evidence of all kinds, sort of empirical evidence. Where's Bates located? What kind of education it is? What's in the course catalog? To interpersonal, emotional kind of data, to data about activities, about what the culture of Bates feels like. And bottom line, this is not very scientific, but I feel like students usually come here and the ones who choose Bates like the vibe. So that sounds like a little crazy, like, do you like the vibe? And it's a little difficult because you can't come here this year in person and kick the tires in exactly the way students usually do. But I hope that you're getting a sense of the vibe. And what I would say is the way it's like the liberal arts is you integrate information and you make judgments, whether those are intellectual judgments, emotional judgments, personal judgments. So it's actually quite an important evidentiary task to say, does this all come together for me? And that's what I would say to your students. And I would just offer 3 things that influenced my interest in coming to Bates that students might want to consider. One is Bates is an academically serious place, as evidenced by the fact that all our students do theses or capstone projects. And when I was a high school student thinking about college, I thought, I don't want to do a thesis. I do not want to write a book. I couldn't possibly do that. But a thesis is actually one of the greatest gifts we give you, to work one-on-one with a faculty member on original research. And there's a really cool thing that happened this year. In a biochem class, we had 7 students who over a period of several years synthesized a molecule that is, for any of you on the phone calls who are scientists or in the medical field, has real promise as a TET inhibitor, and it's called Bobcat 339. And it's published. It's now in the patent process because it has pharmaceutical potential. There are, I think, 7 students who worked on it. There may be 4 co-authors on the paper. And one thing I love about Bates is the professor, who's brilliant, Andrew Kennedy. He's not the lead author on the paper. One of the students is the lead author. So that student goes into graduate school with a fantastic publication record already. But that's the kind of work you get to do with Bates faculty. They turn themselves inside out for students. So academic seriousness. The next thing I would say is that Bates has been an inclusive community way before anyone ever said the word inclusive. We were founded in the mid-19th century by Free Will Baptists who were also abolitionists, and they believed that everybody should be allowed to reach their full potential, and that should be done through education. And by everybody, they meant women as well as men, and they meant African Americans as well as white people. And that was extremely unusual in the Civil War era when we were founded. Our founding date is 1855. And I would just tell you, many of the liberal arts colleges that your children may be considering got to those points somewhere in the 1960s, 100 years later. So we've been ahead of our time, and I think we have a really authentic, down-to-earth culture. We've never had fraternities or sororities because why would you take a small college and then carve it even into smaller units based on exclusivity? So that's the second thing I would look at and think about and get the pulse of, the culture, the student culture. And then the third thing is our program and purposeful work, which is, it's not a career center that we've just put lipstick on. It is a deep philosophy that says, we no longer live in a world where you're going to graduate on, one day and walk into IBM or GE and come out 40 years later with a gold watch. You're going to have to make your way in a complicated world, in a global competition for talent, and know what your values, interests, and strengths are, and figure out how to make your choices in a way that align with those. So we begin working with students on thinking purposefully about their time in college and then relating that to post-college choices, so that what we are graduating from here is people who have a strong sense of agency over their own lives and a sense of choice about how they want to move through the world. So I would look at all those three things. I think they're very distinctive. I invite you to pressure test your students, to pressure test them in any way they want. And I feel like we'll stand the test well.
Thanks, Clayton. So building off of that, and perhaps a little different, if you could pick your favorite aspect of life at Bates.
Okay, no question. And it's a little ironic that this is my favorite aspect, given where we all are right now under house arrest of various sorts. But I love the commons, where we eat together as one community. I eat lunch there almost every day. I always see students. Half the time I'm having lunch with students because they'll write me and say, can I come talk to you about X? And I'll say, sure, but why? I have to eat, let's eat lunch together. And I love the fact that Commons is sort of the beating heart of Bates, and our food is fantastic. It's all tons of locally sourced, locally grown food, but also a staff that it's not a rent-a-staff for a college. It's a fantastic leader of dining. We have one of the greenest dining services in the country, as rated by whatever environmental group rates these things. I think we came out 4th in that rating. We have really good and healthy food, good and healthy choices. And I'm sure next year we're going to have slightly different ways of delivering it, because social distancing is going to require some modifications. And we have such a wonderful creative leader of dining, and I think we'll figure that stuff out.
Thanks, Clayton. And I'm sure some of you families had the opportunity to visit Commons, or at least I hope you did when your students were doing their research. And it certainly is that beating heart of campus, and a real wonderful part of day-to-day life, but a good takeaway for many of our graduates and alums. So Clayton, thinking a bit beyond Bates, Maine obviously is a big piece of the experience as well for our students and faculty and staff. And the state's tagline is the way life should be. You see it when you drive in up 95. Can you tell us a little bit about life in Maine and your love for our home state?
Sure. So I had a secret ulterior motive when I came to be president of Bates. I have always wanted to live in Maine because I'm from the hot South. And the idea that you could have these beautiful, gorgeous summers with the ocean and mountains and everything right there, I just thought was fantastic. And I have not been disappointed. Lewiston is an incredibly interesting town, mill town, you know, in its clackety-clack giant mills heyday at the beginning of the 20th century, textiles and shoes with French-Canadian immigrants, has now turned into a very different kind of urban center with a new generation of immigrants. Our students are heavily involved. Huge amounts of our students teach in the public schools in Lewiston as part of their education courses. So we are a national leader in community engaged learning. We also have 600 acres on the coast that are sort of a geological and environmental laboratory where students work with faculty at a place called Short Ridge near Popham Beach, for any of you who may be familiar with Maine, which is another feature. I love the fact that we're 45 minutes, a short 45 minutes from Portland, and all of the wonderful, you know, farm to table, foodie, craft beer stuff that's in Portland. We are 25 minutes in one direction toward the mountains and 25 minutes to the coast in the other. So, and there's no traffic. Once you get across the Piscataqua Bridge, it's like smooth sailing. And in this like socially distancing world, we can still go outside and not be in crowds and all of that. So I think Maine is a personal, irrational passion of mine, but I'm willing to sell it to anybody.
Thank you, Clayton. I think it's a totally rational passion, but anyway. So back to the big decision. We know May 1 is on the horizon, and families here tonight, many of your students have jumped in and are fully committed members of the class of 2024, but certainly understand many still need these final days to make the big decision. So as families, as you're receiving questions from your students, and Clayton, you imagining those questions, how did you advise your own children, Clayton, when it came time for them to decide on their college journey, and what guidance would you give families today?
Well, I will first say that one of my children, my son, told me that I was much too uptight and much too elitist to be involved in his college search. But both of my children made choices that were right for them, and that's the key. So we have chosen your children and know they would be successful at Bates. And I would love to see each and every one of them come here. It would be fantastic. But what I always tell students when we do have the chance to meet on campus at this time of year is you have to feel it. And if Bates feels right, come here. If it doesn't, don't. You've got other good choices. So I don't want to say Bates is the college for everybody. I think anybody who chooses us will find out it is their college and they will embrace it. I have never seen anything to equal the friendship groups I see at Bates, and the number of parents who host Bates students with their children in different places who talk about how wonderful Bates students are. But here's my little secret motto about Bates. So E.E. Cummings has a famous line in a poem: "It takes courage to grow up and become who you really are." And I think Bates is a place that lets students do that. There isn't a Bates mold. There isn't a Bates stamp. And every student has to conform to that. I think we are really, really committed to unlocking the gifts and interests and values of each student and letting them grow up to become who they really are. So if your student thinks that they can find their peeps here, that they can feel at home here, that they can feel challenged, but also relaxed. I mean, one thing I love about Bates, any activity, if you didn't do it in high school, if you didn't do debate, you can do debate here. You can even be president of debate, and you can even be one of 2 women who won the International Women's Debate Contest without debating in high school. That has happened here. You can be part of the orchestra, where I've heard students say, I asked, one young friend of mine, the daughter of someone I know, I said, well, who was a fantastic flute player, committed, went to flute camp every summer. And I said, are you going to play flute in college in the orchestra? And she was like, no. And I'm like, but why not? You love it. You're great. She goes, I didn't play in Carnegie Hall when I was 11. And Bates isn't that kind of place. We have wonderfully talented students who do wonderful things, but it's really a low barrier to entry. So if your student looks at Bates and says, this is a world of opportunity that I'm just dying to embrace, please, please, please have them come join this community, because I can assure you they won't regret it. If your student isn't feeling it, have them go somewhere else.
Great. Well, thank you, Clayton. So families, hopefully that addressed a number of the questions that came in prior to this evening, but we're seeing them come in more. So thank you again for joining us live tonight or this afternoon if you're West Coast, or early morning if you're in Asia. Nonetheless, you've got some new questions that have come in and want to get right to those, Clayton. So first, Robin asked, can you talk about some of the internship opportunities and how Bates specifically facilitates those? So you
Sure.
talked about purposeful work, but internships and how we facilitate those.
So internships are one of the important components of purposeful work, and we facilitate them in different ways. One way is to say students can find internships through the purposeful work program or on their own, but apply for purposeful work funding. So we raise about $350,000 a year to fund internships, because one thing that is important to Bates as part of our equity principles, we want to make sure every student can have an internship opportunity at some point in their 4 years. So we have internships in a lot of major cities. We have them in different sectors. We have data analytics, we have finance, we have nonprofit management, we have arts related, just the full gamut. Because the key thing about purposeful work is that it's not a kind of work. It's just work that's aligned with the student's interests and values. So that applies to the internship in the summer. And one thing I would say about it is we run a cohort in the summer. So we've got purposeful work interns, and they check in on a weekly basis. They're in a chat, which I'm sure every high school senior is totally sick of now with being under house arrest. But in the summer, they're in a chat, and the first we from the mothership, from here at Bates, we have a fantastic staff in purposeful work, and they will send a prompt and say, tell us the biggest challenge you faced in your first week, or send us a picture that encapsulates your second week at work. And maybe somebody sends a Xerox machine, and maybe somebody else sends the inside of an operating theater, which we've had all of that. So we have we pride ourselves on both the philosophy and the execution of purposeful work, and it's very robust and very well funded.
Great, thank you, Clayton. So a little bit of a different tact, but another question came in from Liz. Can you speak to the financial strength of the college?
Absolutely. So we went into the COVID crisis in the strongest position we've ever been in, with our endowment at a historic high, with our fundraising at a historic high, and with applications at a historic high, which is a very strong market test. You can find places that have much more endowment than we do. You can find places that have less. We've always operated in the black and completely responsibly. We run a tight operation, but a really well designed. We put a lot of thought into designing what we do well. Purposeful work would be a great example. We're going to feel the effects of the COVID pandemic, as will every institution in this country, and it's harder for some to absorb than others. I'm not worried about Bates existentially. We've got a lot of tough decisions to make, and things to work through, but none of those will be at the expense of the education of our students.
Thank you, Clayton. So another question, different again. Sarah asks, is Bates thinking about ways to help students particularly first-year students, connect socially and build community outside of the classroom if we are in fact remote next fall?
Absolutely. I mean, we have really had to do that this spring. I mean, in the winter. I mean, when our students went home by March 17th, we had 4 weeks left in term. So to the point behind that question, it was much easier for students to feel a sense of community in their remote classrooms because they already knew each other. So they were sort of Zoom reunions. But for the fall, we would have to build that community from scratch. The good news is that we have an incredibly gifted, creative dean of students and has built an amazing team. And they have spent all spring working on this precise question. We have a fantastic vice president for equity and inclusion, an office for intercultural education, working on precisely this question with our students from a wide range of backgrounds. We have an Department of Global Studies working with our international students. I would say a lot of the work lies ahead of us, but we have been, if you will, prototyping it these last 6 weeks, and that's going to give us a big leg up. We're finding out what students are responding to, aren't responding to, and we all know it's imperfect, but there are ways to do this. And the faculty, we just sent out surveys to both faculty and students following the end of classes for this term, which just ended this past Friday. And we will learn a lot there as well about building community in the classroom and then figuring out how to do the out of classroom stuff.
Thank you, Clayton. So Julie asks, can you, Clayton, talk about postgraduate outcomes, specifically jobs? And if I may add, if you could share with us, Clayton, your thoughts about how, given the economy currently, how the liberal arts will prepare students perhaps in unique ways.
Sure. So it's interesting. One of the reasons we have purposeful work is that I came to Bates shortly after the great, what was then called the Great Recession, and now it may begin to look like a dinky little recession of 2008, 9, 10. And our students then were graduating into tough economies. And I have always thought, and I think it's been validated in income streams over time, it's been validated by employers, that the liberal arts are the most powerful and adaptable form of education, particularly in a world where individuals need to make their way with a sense of agency. But what we've done, again, stemming partly out of the last recession, was to create a really strong, philosophically strong, and designed well program precisely to help our students in the postgraduate, in the bridge to the world after college. So we're not starting from scratch, and we're not starting in a panic. We're starting from a position of strength. And just so you know, I'm not just sort of blowing smoke here. The Stanford Design School last year did a book of case studies on innovation in higher education. And I think they picked 12 case studies out of 200 they considered, and Bates' Purposeful Work Program was one of the ones they considered. So go to the Stanford Design School website, or we can send you any propaganda as well. We also did a study last year with Gallup, pressure testing the concept of, is finding purpose in work important to people? And it was overwhelmingly important. Purpose well-being tests the highest in Gallup's groups, and finding purpose in work ranked, 80% of people ranked it as extremely important or very important, and yet only 40 to 50% of people said they found it. And here's the deal. I think one could argue, in a very tough economy, I don't care if my kid finds purpose in work, I just want him to find a job. But what I will tell you is that the kind of developmental work we're doing with students as they prepare to enter the economy is really paying off dividends in terms of their success. And I expect it will continue to. That said, we're not going to be able to sugarcoat an unemployment rate of 20%. And hopefully that does not remain at that level. It's going to be a very tough environment. And I can tell you, we have a wonderful director of purposeful work and a wonderful staff, and they are working very hard now to make sure they're well prepared.
Great, thank you, Clayton, for that. And a bit related to purposeful work, but Michael asked specifically, as a pre-med student, what would Bates offer my child that other schools may not?
So first of all, we offer fantastic research experiences. I gave the example of Bobcat 339, the molecule that was discovered. But I will tell you, the great thing about coming to a liberal arts college is there aren't graduate students and postdocs to work with our researchers. And you might say, well, are they really researchers? Yes, they are. They get incredibly competitive grants from the NSF, from NIH, from all manner of foundations, and they are doing cutting edge research. They're extremely well published. So students get that kind of individualized background in biomedical research, in physics and chemistry, whatever, and all of those are relevant to potentially to med school. Then I think we do an excellent job of structuring the process through which students apply to med school, working with them on the essays. It's almost a full-time job to apply to med school these days, and we do a lot of help with very knowledgeable adults along that way too. But fundamentally, it's the quality of the education and the accessibility to first-rate scientists throughout the time here.
Great, thank you, Clayton. And if I just may add, I know you've spent quite a bit of time talking about purposeful work tonight. I think what could also be perhaps unique about pre-med health studies at Bates is that purposeful work guidance, so that there is that alignment beyond the sciences in terms of what also might excite the students, so that if they pivot or shift tracks down the road, they'll have a lot in their tool belt, so to say. So we have a couple of questions that have come in prior to our session that we'll get to. As much as others, feel free to keep asking and raising your hands, but a little different here. Clayton, could you talk about what some of the students do during the very short breaks if they can't travel home during that?
Sure. So as we've gotten more diverse geographically, we've had to really take on board the notion that in a like a 4-day break over a long weekend, students aren't going to be able to go home, or even a 5-day break, sometimes the entire Thanksgiving week. So first of all, we feed students during those breaks. We run vans for activities so that they can be with each other and not be sitting in their dorms feeling like, how come I don't have a family nearby to go to? Some students, a lot of students go places with friends where they've got friends who live more locally. But I think it used to be in higher education that the colleges sort of didn't acknowledge that students were here during break, and they were kind of on their own, and we've evolved well beyond that at this point.
Great, thank you, Clayton. Again, another question that came in prior to this session, and you spoke a bit earlier about the financial strength of the college, but have the trustees or others across the institution met to discuss extended remote learning, but really specifically how that might impact diversity on campus, international students, and beyond?
Sure. So let me just give a little bit of architecture for how we've organized ourselves to deal with planning and uncertainty as we head toward the fall. so we have the faculty staff committee looking at fall planning, the faculty staff committee looking at finance. We have a trustee ad hoc committee that is looking at both of these things together. So we are very much united in this. We have typical governance structures like most colleges where there's a senior staff and then there are faculty committees. But we have specifically streamlined this process to make sure that we're able to make decisions in the best possible way at the pace we need to. The other thing I will say is that I talk with my college president pals. NESCAC is a strong, very strong group of colleagues, and we're not allowed to compare financial notes, but we can compare notes about how we're thinking of teaching models for the fall. The question I think was about equity and inclusion and international students. So one of the things we had to do immediately when we went to remote learning for this spring is to make sure that all of our students had the devices and the connectivity to participate in our classrooms. And we have had staff reaching out to any students who didn't seem to be appearing in the classes as they should. And in fact, I think I heard that we rounded up the last student who we hadn't heard from a few weeks ago. So it's very much on our mind, and our Office of Intercultural Education has been running chats, hangouts, all of these things to try to make sure that the students who really are part of our Office of Intercultural Education are well supported during this period. For international students, they're very much on our minds now because we are worried that some of our students who are, sophomores, juniors, seniors may have trouble getting back here. So we are working with them and their families already to try to figure out plans for the fall. And we may have to be, all colleges may have to be doing some version of in-person and remote teaching to make sure we're reaching all of our students.
Thank you, Clayton. And if I may add, right now, as we imagine the class of 2024 coming to us for the fall, we in admission and student financial services, along with our colleagues in student affairs, namely the Center for Global Education, have a collaborative effort where we're in constant communication and close counsel as we work with those students individually in the coming months. So certainly our currently enrolled students, but also as we look to support those incoming students. So another question, and this might feel a little bit like a return for some folks, but I'm mindful that others have joined midstream, which is absolutely fine. We welcome you. So thank you for hopping in. But Clayton, could you go back a little bit and just provide some context as you think about the fall and what a start date might be, not necessarily a date, but just how we think about planning for the fall?
So I would say the approach we're taking and the approach that most of my college president colleagues are taking is to work as hard and as fast as we can now on several different contingencies and try to buy time before we actually make a final decision. Because in my conversations with public health experts, what they're saying is we're learning more every 2 weeks than everything we understood about COVID, the virus, the shape of the pandemic, whatever the political decisions are that are affecting testing and opening and all of that. We keep learning so much more in each 2-week period than we knew to date. So what we're doing and what everybody, I think we're all in the same boat because we compare notes, and you can also see it in any in the Chronicle of Higher Education. I know some of you on the call maybe work in colleges and universities and you'd be aware of this. We're trying to narrow things down to a few likely scenarios and then hold off on decision making, because we all know what our preferred decision is, which is to bring it back our students in person. But does one think about a slightly different calendar? Do you think about some hybrid classes that that can reach the students who aren't able to be on campus? Do you do a semester with the 4 classes going on together, or do you divide it into modules? All of these things are being thought about, talked about. We'll narrow in, we're in the process of narrowing in on them. And then we will make a decision as late as possible so that we don't have to make a super conservative decision, but with time for families to plan.
Thanks, Clayton. I think helpful for all to hear that again. So a different question. I think people are enjoying listening to you and learning from you tonight. So much so that Wendy asks, do you ever teach a class, Clayton?
You know, it's interesting. I taught a class for years at Harvard on federal higher education policy, and I love teaching. I love teaching. And I keep thinking I should be teaching a class here. And I've even got, I've got about 2 notebooks this high with all the materials I would put together, that some combination of policy, legal issues, and just interesting problems in higher education. But I have not done it since I've been at Bates. But that's a good, you know, this would be a good time for me to try to put a course together.
Well, it might be your moment, Clayton. So interestingly, related, Andrew asked if you, Clayton, could offer your thoughts on the world post-COVID-19 and any changes, permanent, temporary, that you think might occur in the higher ed landscape.
So this is a moment where if I could see who I was talking to, I would say I'm much more interested in hearing your ideas. None of us knows. What I do know is I don't ever talk about a return to normal. I never say normalcy because my mother taught me you couldn't say that. It wasn't a real word. But we will all be changed by this. I think I will personally never take for granted how far I live from my children, and can I just assume I can hop on a plane anytime? Will we ever shake hands again? I don't know. Did I ever used to wash my hands for 20 seconds? No, but my soon-to-be son-in-law, doctor, gave me a great lesson. So how will it affect higher education? I'm not quite prepared to, I feel like I haven't totally thought that through. Do I think we will be changed? Yes. Certainly I do think the residential model of higher education that is about educating the whole person through a variety of experiences is the richest model of education that has ever been devised. And I hope we can continue to do that. So I'm not gonna go out on other limbs yet. I need to experience more and think more before I'm ready to do that.
Well, thank you, Clayton. I think totally fair, but appreciate, again, all that you shared there. So families, just want to put one final call out. If there are any last minute burning questions that you would like to hear Clayton's thoughts. And if those come in, I'll just say, or as they come in, I'll share a couple of things just to remind you all that this has been a vibrant group, it seems, for many of you, and certainly for all of us back at Bates. And we'll continue to have events for you families in this group. Next Monday, we'll have some other colleagues, our VP for Equity and Inclusion, Noelle Chaddock, joined by Josh McIntosh, who is our Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students, and then Malcolm Hill, who is also our Dean of the Faculty and Vice President for Academic Affairs. So as we think about those that will take care of your students, those who will support your students, thought it would be worth your time to spend Monday evening. So stay tuned for that, but also know that your students have a fabulous group where they're super active and connecting with one another on Facebook as well. And in fact, tonight, Larissa Williams from the biology department will be with them at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we're really loving connecting with you. Certainly, again, wish you were on campus, but this format has seemed to work well for all involved. So thank you for that. Oh, and I was just reminded there will be an alumni panel group. I jumped ahead to next week, but an alumni panel group for you all tomorrow at 8 p.m. So just focus on tomorrow and then we'll get to next week. So it seems like you've all gotten the information that you needed. So just want to turn it to Clayton for one last set of comments. Any final thoughts that you wish to share with families, Clayton?
First, I just want to thank you for taking the time tonight to probably do your nth Zoom of the week, and how many in the last 6 or 7 weeks. So I really appreciate your level of interest and engagement and the interest that your question showed. So that's fantastic. And I really can't wait to welcome you guys as Bates families. It will be great. It's such a wonderful place to be, and it's even more wonderful when there's students here. It feels a little deserted at the moment. So I really look forward to welcoming you on campus in person and seeing the faces behind these questions. So thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Clayton. We can't express just how much this has meant to all of us, and I can imagine the families back home getting to connect with you. So really appreciate you being here. And again, families, congratulations to your students. Stay well and stay connected, and we look forward to continuing many conversations in the coming days, weeks, and months. So thanks again for joining, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.